uncertainty we went into in the third quarter of 2019, because everybody started preparing for the sulfur 2020 compliance. And those were very difficult days to bunker your ships, to work with the charterers to see that, you needed to keep the compliant bunkers on board before the 1st of January. So COVID was not something, or any other event like that was not at all there. Everybody was hoping that end of 2019, when sulfur 2020 comes in, everything will settle down. The bunker prices, which went up to $750 a ton, actually bothered us to some extent. But we were hoping that things would settle down, and by February end or by March. As a matter of fact, these days in the dry bulk market, the Chinese New Year has a very big bearing. So we thought that after the Chinese New Year was over, things will stabilize. So there was no special arrangements that we made as an owner prior to COVID. So that's my answer for prior to COVID. With just expectation that the bunker prices would settle down. During COVID, I can tell you 101 stories of all kinds of difficulties we faced. In the initial stages, we were rather fortunate that Hong Kong was permitting crew changes. And since we are primarily Pacific traders and a lot of other owners who are Pacific traders like us, they decided to use Hong Kong as their base for crew change, and we very successfully did it also. Things became rather difficult after Hong Kong completely banned. China was already banned. So main challenge during COVID period was how to get your crew signed off. Contract periods, they were being reached by the dozens. 4 months contracts were being extended to 8 months, 9 months. So the main challenge as an owner, what we faced is that how to find an employment where we can get an opportunity to do a crew change. Every single employment that we looked at, all our ships, we run a fleet of 14 bulk carriers at the moment, Kamsarmaxes, Supras and Handys, and the main guiding factor was where can we go where we can change crew. That used to be the first thing. The reason for that was that the initial stages nobody expected, because as you know probably very well that Hong Kong has experienced SARS in 2003. So we do have some experience of this pandemic, but that was very short-lived, It started in the month of February and by May it was all gone. So when COVID hit Hong Kong, on 25th of January to be precise, there was not too much of alarm because people thought that, okay, we have to go through the same mask system and then social distancing and all that, and by April, May, it will all be gone. It was much later in April, March, late March, beginning April, we realized that this could be in here for a long haul. And then there was nothing else to do because you were presented with a fait accompli. So we had to simply plan our employment where we could do crew change. And the next thing was how to work with our counterparts, with our charterers, as to keeping our certificates in place, because it's not just the crew, the ships also require trading certificates. If your class cannot go, if your service cannot be done, if your dry docks cannot be done, things could get difficult. So mostly our main challenge was how to get a crew change, how to find an employment which will facilitate that, and how to keep your trading status of your ships going with respect to repairs and class and trading certificates. This was during the challenge. Now going forward, slowly a realization has come in that since we are going to be in here for the long haul, the third part of my answer would be that going forward now what we are doing is that we have taken a very drastic step which you being an ex-seafarer would realize was not very easy for us to do. We are now changing the entire crew at one go. You could never imagine this, about 19 people on the ship and the entire lot goes and the entire new lot takes over. If you look at the risk management team in various ship owners companies, they would simply be absolutely flabbergasted if somebody suggested something like this. You needed to have staggered reliefs, master in this port, mate in that port, chief engineer in this port. Now we cannot afford all those things. So we need to do two things. We need to do complete crew change so that for the next 4 to 6 months there is no problem for the crew. And secondly, to find longer duration voyages. Short duration voyages are always very difficult for the crew because of the simple reason that nobody can go ashore, and you start getting into the mentality of the container ships and the tankers, which the dry bulk never had. So these are the two things that we are doing right now, that we are now changing the entire lot at one go, and we are finding longer employments like East Coast South. We, as a company, we never used to take the risk of ballasting our ships towards East Coast South America. And now, for the last 6 months, 4 of my ships have done that. Straight ballasted. We'll see what comes along. So those are I hope you have answered your question to these 3 points.
Thank you so much. And I can understand the commercial burden which might have been on your head. But I believe, can I know from you that what has been the approach of the flag state and the class in order to support the owners during this time? Because when people cannot travel, the class people, all these things, have they given you enough extensions to manage this situation? Apart from that, you are facing with the crew?
Extensions, not so much. Yes, couple of our ships needed extensions on their dry dock dates. But the one new thing that came out of this, and which is a reality today, is the virtual surveys. Uh, you would not believe, but now we are having audits which are doing virtually. There was one ship of ours in India where the master and the chief engineer, they both carried their mobile phones, and with their WhatsApp camera on, they went through every part of the ship, and the inspector was sitting somewhere else in Singapore, and he was looking at it, and he concluded an audit. So that happened, the virtual audit, which I mean, 1 year ago, you could not have imagined a class allowing you an audit on a virtual basis, class allowing you a survey on virtual basis. And yes, the flags were giving you a little bit of leeway before also. This time they have given a little more. As far as the crew change is concerned, I think the only
Thank
place
you so
where
much, sir.
it happened was in Australia. Otherwise, no problems.
Thank you so much to the more question answer, because our rest of the panelists have also joined. Mr. Rajkumar Sharma, Mr. Jagmeet Makkad, and Mr. Sriram has joined. I've given the brief introduction to you all to the daily. But I'd like to introduce to our audience that Mr. Rajkumar Sharma, once again, that he is chairman and managing director of Vaibhav Group of Logistics. He is engaged in the international shipping, freight forwarding, and logistics business, air freight and sea. Not only that, he is the founder and president cum CEO of the Indo-Latin American Chambers of Commerce, where he facilitated a network of successful business to foster economic, commercial, and financial relationships between India and the Latin America countries. Without taking much of time, sir, I would move on to introduce other two panelists. Mr. Jagmeet Makkad, as I said to you before, we are actually and distinct in the commercial shipping, where he has been 17 years with the KC Maritimes and 7 to 8 years with the Noble Group as a co-head and ex-president of the Noble Shipping. And now he actually and has been a very well-known person for the an educator in maritime arbitrator. He is a member of Hong Kong, fellow of the Hong Kong Institute of Arbitrator, and a member in supporting London Maritime Arbitration Associations. He is a member of the Hong Kong Center of International Commercial Arbitration, chairman of the Maritime Logistic Arbitration Institute of Chartered. So we have the Sriram. Sriram Asia driver. He's been in Singapore. Comes with a background in trading. Satya Sai Institute of Higher Learning. Dear sir, since you all joined good ladder, then I started with. But I will again ask Mr. Rajkumar sir. View challenge now during the COVID and how is the post-COVID and strategy for your company and in general, please.
I'm not sure, Govind, if Mr. Sharma is online or not, but I do see Mr. Shriram online. Maybe you could.
I think the network is very poor of Govind, Captain Govind. So let's hear from the Captain Sriram. So can Jagmeet, you can coordinate because the network of the Govind is not coming and properly. So please coordinate and members are participants wanted to your input. So Sriram, your turn, please.
Yeah, I mean, we were all waiting for Shriram to give his nice presentation. And I'm personally looking forward to it, Shriram. So I was wondering if you could kick things off with your presentation, if you are all right.
Oh, yeah, sure, can do that. Can one of you confirm that you are hearing me clear?
I can hear you absolutely clear. I can see you clearly. I can hear you clearly. I can hear Mr. Dheeraj Khandelwal also clearly and hear him. I can see Jagmeet very clearly, but he is not audible. He is very, very faint. Jagmeet is very, very faint. And I'm not wondering, I'm wondering whether it is because of the headphone he's using. I'm not sure, but I cannot hear him. Can anyone else hear Jagmeet?
No, I cannot hear Jagmeet.
No, neither can I. But I can hear Shriram very well. So maybe Shriram can start off.
Shriram, please.
Sure.
Give your presentation, please.
I hope that's visible now. Once one of you confirm, then I'll get rolling on.
No, it's not visible.
It is not yet being shared, Shriram.
Okay, let me try once more. How about now?
Yes, it's coming up. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yes, it's now.
Sure. Quite some technical challenges to start this evening, but yeah, I won't delay it further. I'll take the next 10 minutes or so to kind of set the stage on where we are, specifically on dry bulk. A quick introduction to Platts and what we do in shipping markets. So we have our team sitting in Singapore, London, and Houston. We come out with reports on both tankers and dry freight. And in the dry freight wire, we are starting to increase our coverage on the container markets also. But at the outset, I'll say, I mean, my discussions today will be restricted to the dry bulk markets, which is what I know better than the other markets. So we come up with a hands-on expertise on the market, and our main selling point is our methodology, which ensures transparency and integrity in all our assessments. This is how the dry freight wire looks. It's a daily publication coming out every Singapore working day. It has assessments from Capes all the way down to the Handies on most of the liquid routes. We have about 130 odd assessments on a dollar per metric ton basis. We also work backwards from that to calculate what the time charter equivalent returns to a ship owner would be on the Capes, Kamsarmaxes, Ultras, and the Supramaxes. Given that the bunker prices are mostly that are being published by Platts, it was fairly easy for us to also come up with what the values would be on scrubber fitted ships, and that's what, in short, we do. So without further delay, I'll move on to my presentation. A very quick outlook on how Platts Analytics, the division of Platts which is into forecasting business, is looking at the world GDP growth. We did see 20. I mean, earlier on, the expectation was we could come back to 2019 levels at least by the third quarter of 2021. But with all the second wave of the pandemic that is going on across the globe, and perhaps even more stricter lockdowns that the world could go into, my colleagues in the analytics are expecting that we'll be somewhere close to the amount of GDP will be somewhere close to 2019 levels, perhaps in the third quarter or possibly even the fourth quarter of 2022. So there's a good 2 years ahead of us. And the reason I'm bringing this up is to set things in at pace so that we have a better understanding of where demand is going to come from for dry bulk markets. And this will hold good for all the other markets as well, be it containers or tankers. So the next session, or over the next few slides, I'll go over quickly on how some of the commodities, the major commodities, are doing. Firstly, the steel markets, no surprises there. I mean, except for one country, everywhere else we have perhaps seen a contraction in terms of steel production, while at the same time we are seeing a record steel output from the Chinese so far this year. But that said, with the Q4 ahead of us and the winter months coming up into China, we usually see them cut back a bit on their steel production in lieu of controlling the pollution around in the major cities. So as a result, in general, we also see the iron ore consumption in China start going down as we enter into Q4. The graph in front of us is, we are looking specifically at the Brazilian iron ore exports by destination. And the reason I picked Brazil and not the overall Chinese imports is, I mean, almost 75% of China's demand is met by Australia, which is fairly close, while it is a very staple demand for the Capesize ships. It is demand that is there or not there out of Brazil, which dictates how the spot market is faring. We have constantly been seeing reports from the biggest Brazilian miner, Vale, on what their production estimates are going to be. But I think there is another way to look at it, in the sense Vale does have stockpiles across the globe. And during the dam disasters they had and the poor weather which impacted production, they've been pulling down on their own stocks across the globe, be it in Malaysia or even their own stocks in China itself. So while they are still promising of better production, it is not same as higher sales. It may or may not be. So as a result, we could not, I mean, it's very easy to say we are going to see a good amount of volume being pumped out of Brazil going into Q4, but I would still have some question marks around it. So what that translates to is the Capesize rates maybe not doing $30,000 going into Q4, and we'll come back to that shortly. This is my colleagues' expectation on how the iron ore prices could fare going into the rest of this year and the early part of next year, they do expect it to correct it slightly lower. And it goes back to my earlier discussion on the steel production in China contracting slightly over the rest of this year and perhaps during the early next year because of winter and the upcoming Lunar New Year holidays. So that's on steel. Moving on to coal, again, the global seaborne coal demand is definitely looking at least about 100 million tons short compared to what we saw in 2019. In percentage terms, just looking at figures until September, we have seen a contraction of about 11%, and it adds up, and annualizing it, that will add up to the 100 million tons that I just mentioned. And looking at China specifically, which has been a topic of discussion given the talk that we keep hearing in the market of a quota that they have in place for ports and provinces and what they are getting or not getting from, or what they could or not import over the rest of this year. But overall, something interesting to point out is if we just look at all the statistics on their imports up till September this year, as of 20 days ago, their overall coal imports is very, very close to what they imported last year. It was only about 1 or 1.5% lower. And interestingly, they have actually imported more coal from Australia this year compared to what they have imported over the same period last year. I'll leave it hanging there for us to come back to it later if there are questions. But overall, we are seeing a contraction in the global seaborne thermal coal demand. And the last major commodity that I'm going to be touching on is the grain markets. And on that, a quick take on the soybeans. We certainly do see the Chinese imports of soybeans increase year on year. This graph in front of us is going back to 2017 to show the different origins from which they've been bringing their soybeans in. The estimates for 2020 is for definitely higher beans from Brazil coming into China at about 60 million tons. But I'd like to point out to the growth that is expected on US beans coming into China, and it is expected to reach the pre-trade war levels. What we need to keep in mind is the shipment period for the US soybeans starts somewhere around now, October, going into middle of next year. Their marketing year is October to September. So that is something interesting to watch out for. And on the corn also, in general, there is a bullish sentiment around the prices for corn. China has sustained their appetite for corn also. I mean, some bad weather in China itself during this year has resulted in them writing down some of their stocks, or at least that is the market talk. And from there, we do see them a bit more in the corn markets as well. And lastly, on the wheat markets, a big change in trade flow that we could be expecting going forward into the upcoming year is the better weather and therefore better harvest for wheat from Australia, which would again mean so the trade flows for the upcoming year would perhaps resemble what we were seeing 3 or 4 years ago. So what was coming from Black Sea in 2020 or 2019 is very likely to be taken over again by produce from Australia. So we're definitely looking at some changes to the grain trade flows, and that is largely being attributed to changes to weather, and that is becoming an increasing pattern going forward. A very quick take on how supply of dry bulk is faring. We still are seeing about a 4% expected growth to overall tonnage in deadweight terms, even for 2020. That growth figure looks slightly lesser for 2021 and 2022, and that's because the order book currently stands fairly thin. And when we say thin, that's in comparison to the existing fleet. So the fleet is still growing, And if we compare this to the first slide that I showed in terms of GDP growth and where my colleagues from analytics are expecting us to reach even 2019 levels, which is still 2 years ahead of us, we can fairly easily conclude that we're still going to be an oversupplied market. Just looking at this statistically. Of course, there is going to be seasonality which plays into the shipping market as always, and that is going to impact the spot markets and some volatility coming up with it. The last couple of slides in terms of how my colleagues in analytics are looking at the freight markets, and this is on key Capesize routes. They do expect the rates to slip lower going into Q4, and frankly, we are already seeing signs of that. The Capesize market, which started October in and around the $30,000 mark, as we speak, is now between $15,000-$16,000 on a round voyage basis, and that is what my colleagues are expecting as well. It's a fairly more flattish or to a slightly cushioned drop on the Panamaxes and the Supras, for a lack of better word. So that's in short where I leave the discussion to go forward from. One last topic which we could come back at a later stage, depending on how the interest is and how greenhouse gas emissions are going to come in on the shipping markets. Captain Rajiv earlier on, when not a lot of us were on stage, did speak about IMO 2020 and what it was supposed to have impact on this year's earnings and everything going around. But frankly, a month into it, 2020 and IMO 2020 was thrown out of the window. It was all COVID. But that said, the shipping market does have has set steep targets for itself going into 2030 and 2050. So we should be expecting very strong technological changes which are going to affect what we see or what we don't. But I leave that for the panel to take it up. But I just wanted to throw all those things in so that we could explore that further.
Thank you very much. Sriram, can you hear me?
Oh, very clearly, Captain.
Right. Thank you so much for your nice presentation, very detailed. I would like to move in to Mr. Jagmeet Makkar as to have his comment actually that during these circumstances, while we are going through all kind of certainties, we have seen the seasonality hitting up into the July, August, September in Q3, and suddenly we see the impact of the China banning on the coal. How do you see, sir? What is your comment on that? How do we manage the freight forward? I mean, our risk management as an owner, as a charterers who has exposure to the future. So can I have your comments onto that? Jagmeet, can you hear? We cannot hear you at all. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not. So maybe I will need to ask the question also, and we will probably need to give answer also. We are facing big problem now with the IT, right? I think it's some signal issue suddenly.
Jagmeet ji, if I could suggest, if you can try
maybe,
a different...
Sriram, will you...
Can't hear you. Try a different web browser compared to what you're using now. I mean, for me, that worked. The earlier browser I was using didn't work. And then I tried a different one, which did work.
I would like to ask this question to you. How do you go about the risk management in terms of, like, say, you and our assets are also exposed? If, as Sriram says, that the market is looking as to be going down from the highs of Q3, can I know your view onto that? How to manage futures freight agreements?
You know, in the ownership in the shipping dry bulk market, you find basically three kinds of owners. This is my experience. One is what I call traditionally the Japanese model of ownership, where ship owning is not really really a passion for any of them. It's basically a investment vehicle. You know, the model where a ship owner buys the ship, somebody arranges finance, somebody arranges a charter 5 years, somebody arranges for a sale at the end of the 5 years. So and he gives the ship management to somebody else. Someone does the technical management, someone does the chartering. That's one model. Then there is another model where the ship owners are totally involved in their shipping, all right, but they prefer to do long-term charters. I mean, Hong Kong, particularly, if you know, I'm not talking about others' ownership, but very broadly, the Chinese ownership here was very happy with this model when they used to buy ships and then put it out for 3 years charter, 5 years charter. But they never used to give the management away. They still kept the management with them. And then the third type of ship manager is who tries to do mixed bag employment strategy, keeping the management in-house. So I would think that we particularly fall in that third kind of ownership, where we keep the technical management, commercial management, crewing management, everything in-house. We don't use any third parties. And at the same time, as far as the employment of the ship is concerned, we use mixed bag. Like we do watch the market closely. And for example, Sriram's Platts is something that we keep looking at all the time, in addition to Bloomberg and others. And we take a call on the market and we spread our risk somewhat by keeping some ships on the spot market, keeping some ships on short period market, and some ships on a little longer market. Till last year, we were also participating in a pool. That is also a strategic tool many owners use, that they put their ships in the pool to guard against the falling market, dropping market, because pool traditionally always do better in a poor market. But our presence in the pool was more to compare and benchmark ourselves, because we had similar ships. So we put two ships in the pool and two we were running ourselves, and then we used to always continuously benchmark end of the financial year as to how they did and what we did. More or less, it all evened out eventually. Sometimes we beat them, sometimes they beat us. So right now also our strategy is the same. We know that there are problems with COVID. Fortunately, shipping demand is still held up, as very clearly shown to you by Sriram's graphs. You have seen iron ore has gone up and grain is still maintaining its volumes. We don't have any capes, by the way. So, and that is one question that I have kept for Sriram. I'm going to ask him later on, which I keep asking all the international brokers, SSY, Arrow, and Clarksons, and all this, all the analysts in dry bulk market. Why do they only talk about Brazil and capes? There are three other segments in dry bulk: Panamax, Supramax, and Handies. Why don't they talk about that? Every presentation that I've seen in last 1 year only deals with capes and Brazil. Capes, I don't know why. This is one question I have not understood, but there was one answer given by Arrow that it filters down. If capes do like this and this, I don't. I mean, I am old school of thought, and I feel that capes are not really shipping; they are industrial shipping. So they should not be actually clubbed with Panamax, Supramax, and Andes. But that's separate. Coming back to your question, the strategy that we do is that we mix our employment of the ships. We do a little bit of spot, we do a little bit of short period, and a little bit of long period. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask you, because as an owner, you don't use the FFA to hedge yourself because the market has been very cyclic. We have seen that during the Q3, Q4, the market, like say for this Q4, for the Panamax especially, if you look at it on Kamsar, market has gone for the Q4 at 13,000 levels, 13,500 levels. And the Q1, Q2, it's still trading at around 11,500 levels. So you don't try to take the advantage of the market to whether your earnings on your vessels, or you just like to be seeking like the pool to secure yourself, or you like to go for the long-term physical charter. I mean, what is your view on the uses of FFA to weather your risk on the freight exposure?
In the part of the world where I exist, Govind, generally most people know that I am totally against FFAs. Everybody knows that. I have very strong views about that. And suffice it to say that there used to be a word called weapons of mass destruction, WMD. And FFAs, in my opinion, are weapons of financial mass destruction. We as a company actually in 2005 engaged a very big FFA broking house, and we brought them to Hong Kong at our expense, and we got all our commercial and technical people to do a 3 days course to try and understand what FFA was all about. And then we dabbed into FFA. And let me share this experience of mine, personal experience, with you all on the panel. I was in China attending a dry cargo seminar, and the broker called me and told me that my position was giving me 250,000 US dollars, $250,000 I was gaining if I was going to liquidate my position. And that really took me completely by surprise, because I was not watching my position on a daily basis. And then when I reported back to the ownership, my owners got very nervous, and my management, financial management sitting in Gibraltar, said, this is not hedging, this is pure speculating. If we liquidate today and we make $250,000 with a small position of ours, then this is nothing to do with shipping, this is not hedging, this is not risk management. We forbid you to do this. And we closed our account with BNP, and we never dived into FFA from that day. And by the way, we did liquidate our position and collected that $250,000 before we went away.
Right, that's actually a view, but what I feel that, even going physical is also in speculation, because when you're going for an asset, you're expecting market to rise up,
No,
so expectation is both.
This thing is, Govind, I have two main objections against FFA. First and foremost, when I was following it, and I followed it quite a bit, good 7-8 years, I followed that market. I personally feel that there are total 15 to 20 players, and they decide the market. So your market makers, the people who make the markets go up or go down, they are not, and the bulk carrier market is the ownership is very fragmented. The ownership is very fragmented.
No, what I'm trying to come overall, I just said this market. My personal view is that maybe 60%, 70% of the speculator, but 30% still does the hedging. What do we see that today?
You can take that.
Like you are looking at the average earning of your vessel. So what I'm trying to say that not to go for the speculative, but that you want to earn $12,000 per month, right? Or $10,000 per month, whatever that. So if the market gives an opportunity, by all means, I believe we should take it. Beyond that, if the market goes up, definitely you will lose against the paper and you will gain on your vessel. That is what I mean to say.
I think that today's this topic was probably was to be done by an FFA broker. He's not here for some reason.
Right. So he is not there. Just wanted to highlight. But Jagmeet is here.
Tell you his views, but I have only 2 points. One, that I always thought that it is very limited number of players who decide the market, the direction of the market, up or down. And secondly, I always thought that there is not a proper match. A hedge is supposed to give you a match, but it is not a hedge in my opinion, because it doesn't give you exact match. Your vessel position, physical position could be here and paper position could be there. There could be a lag and it is not the match. And therefore, in my terminology, in my Oxford English Dictionary, it is not really a hedge, but it might be for others. So I have no issues with it, but we don't.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Jagmeet ji, we cannot hear you at all. Sriram, are you there?
Captain, I'm very much
also
here.
not.
I'm
So
very much
we would
here.
like to.
Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Audience, if anything is there.
Yes, Jagmeet ji, can hear you very clearly now.
Now you can hear me towards the end. You guys didn't want to be me on the panel. That is the reason. Okay, just very quickly on the FFA, since we don't have the FFA broker here. Both of you are absolutely right. Hedging is a double-edged sword. 100% that is correct. I mean, if you don't do it right, it's going to be all red everywhere. But if you do it right and you get bit greedy and you shift from hedging to speculative, again, it can be very dangerous. That is what it is. So I would like to just point out 2 or 3 things about which you have not covered on FFA possibly. One is the liquidity. As Rajiv ji, Captain Ketarve mentioned that there are 15, 20 players. You see, in 2007 and 8, we used to have so many players. They were from non-shipping background. They were from banks. They were from funds. There were people who used to use shipping as one asset in their large portfolio. One guy will meet the other guy and say, hey, you got shipping in your portfolio? No. Oh, great place to be in. That's a fantastic space. Get them in. So this is what used to happen. Today, 2 things have happened, which is, one is liquidity has dried up to a very large extent. Second, we are depending more on the average of the routes for hedging rather than the individual routes, whereas your physical may be the individual route. So the basis risk, you have to take care of the basis risk very, very properly. If you don't, it's a very big problem, extremely big problem. And second thing about derivatives basically is the number of trades you have to do to cover one position. It's not like in 2007 and 8. You are having lunch with someone, and by the time you finish lunch, you have bought or sold the entire calendar year, 360 days, or in the evening while having a chat with your boss, you have done that. Today, you want to buy 90 days, maybe you have to do like 15 trades, right? Or 6 DPM. This is something which is very different than before. So if we want to use derivatives in this particular situation, we got to be extremely careful. How do we execute it? What sort of derivatives we need to go? Have we looked at the basis risk, etc.? So that is one thing. And since I've got my voice back, I want to cover the first question, only 2 small points. I'm not going to look at very large points because these points are very close to my heart. You see, as we are looking more and more self-reliance, when the COVID happened and suddenly you realize a particular country is not giving you what you want, and the feeling is that we need to be self-reliant. Self-reliance is very good to a certain aspect, but it cannot override the economist theories like Adam Smith and David Ricardo. The absolute advantage theories and the comparative advantage and the Heckscher-Ohlin, they are there. They are going to stay here. Some of the areas we will be able to be self-reliant without creating much issues with our trade, without creating much issues with the price that the customer is going to pay. But if we are going to use self-reliant on a broad base, in that case, what will happen is we will be doing a lot of things very inefficiently. The people who have already got an ecosystem of resources and resource utilization, we are going to duplicate, every country is going to duplicate, which digitalization is trying to reduce the duplication. If physically we are going to duplicate, that is going to be a problem. So globalization, globalization, regionalization, all these things we'll have to keep in mind. And shipping is the main thing for that. Yes, Captain Govind, sorry.
Thank you, Jagmeet, and good to get your voice. Actually, it has been a very interesting session, actually. And still, I got a few things which I wanted to touch upon too. So, I would like to understand and ask you that what pressure on the shipping industry and how they can remain. I mean, due to the COVID, what are the knock-on effects globally onto the
Yeah, the
onto the
knock-on
shipping?
effects, I think you people have already discussed to a very, and one or two items which were missing, I just mentioned with regards to globalization and changing trading patterns, self-reliance, what is going to do. Captain Titarve mentioned, if you look at the human aspect, that's a knock-on effect. It is not just the crew change, etc. The feeling the crew member today, the officer and the people on board the ship, the feeling they are carrying now, the way they have been treated, the sort of trust that has been affected. They are realizing. I have received 3 survey reports, which I conducted myself for the shipboard staff of different companies. They have a lot of grudges. That's fine, but that's one way of one side of story. We need to explain to them what the companies are doing. As Captain Titarve was mentioning the other day, like 1.2, 1.3 million additional, which is going basically organize the crew changes and all. That's something. Then the employment and the employees, they're upskilling, they're reskilling. If you are going to change the way the world is changing, then the economic, the structural changes that will take place, and finally the self-reliance and trade restrictions, and some cases you can have the strategic areas where you be self-reliant, and the other places you use your world scale, the world pricing to make it easier for your citizens in the country to buy cheap. So that is one. And then you're talking about the pressures on shipping. There are a number of pressures which I'll leave to Captain Titarve to answer, and also Shriram. I will only touch upon the financial pressure. When I talk about financial pressure, is the first is the ship finance. Other one is the financial regulation pressure. I'm not going to touch on the environment regulation and the propulsion systems and their inadequacy at this time to meet the decarbonization. So I won't touch that. We are having a serious issue with ship finance. I mean, if you look in the past, what used to happen, and today what is happening. If you're very good already, if you have deep pockets, if you can provide collaterals, you will still find it. But those days where the entry levels could be very low because ship finance was available, you could always make your cash flows and convince the bank, and the bank will go to their board and say, fine, we can go ahead and give the money. Today, that sort of thing is drying out. It's not drying out, basically, it's reduced. It's only there for the people with projects, with relationships, etc. The other thing is the financial regulations. This IFRS 16, International Financial Reporting Systems, the standards. Because of that, we are having a serious issue. It's not just shipping, it's all the capital intensive industries, like your aviation. How many ships are actually owned by the airplanes are owned by the airlines? Not many. They're all leased. And for shipping also, many a times in large container companies, etc., you have the ships which are leased. If all of them are taken away from that operating lease model and put on your balance sheet as a financial lease, this is going to have effect on your capital structure. And the moment your debt equity ratio goes up, perception of your company of the risk goes up. And when that goes up, your margins that you pay for the new debt, that goes up. So this IFRS is another thing. Then is coming your Basel 3, Basel 4, capital adequacy ratios, your reserve ratios, your liquidity coverage ratios. All these things at this particular point of time may not be that significant. But comes 1st of January 2022 and final up to 2027, when we have this thing coming in place, we are not going to be having an easy time. And then along with like Poseidon principles, then you have the ESG, governance, and social and environment. Ship owners are going to have a lot of questions. I don't want to go into the US and Hong Kong, the taxation issue, which Rajiv ji can cover very well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Jagmeet, for your good, nice cover up onto this. I think we are up with the time as well. We had a 17:45 session. We are already exceeding by almost 5 to 7 minutes. But from you, Rajiv, and from Sriram, unfortunately, Mr. But I would like, and I would like Mr. Khandelwal or Mr. Amit as to take and very broad point actually from starting finance, owning to the chartering to the risk management and what the operating models and the pool systems and then. So thank you very much. I hope that the audience will of this session and thanks for me and our audience. Thank you very much once again.